Sometimes, the most dangerous place in the world is not a battlefield. It's the human mind when it refuses to accept reality. Because in 1974, on a quiet tropical island in the Philippines, a man walked out of the jungle, still believing that World War II was still happening. Not for days, not for months, for nearly 30 years. His name was Hiroo Onoda, and for him, the war never ended. It began decades earlier on Lubang Island, a small, quiet island surrounded by ocean, far from the chaos of the main Yosujes lines. But in late 1944, as World War II was nearing its end, Onoda was sent there with a very specific mission: disrupt enemy operations, destroy resources, and most importantly, never surrender. Before he left, his commanding officer gave him a final order. No matter what happens, you are not allowed to die on your own. No matter what happens, you do not surrender. Those words were not a suggestion. They were absolute, and Onoda took them seriously. Very seriously. Not long after he arrived, Allied forces attacked the island. The Japanese quickly lost control. Troops evacuated, retreated, disappeared. But somehow, Onoda didn't leave. Whether it was confusion, miscommunication, or simply bad timing, he was left behind. Alone, or at least almost alone. A few other soldiers remained scattered across the island, and together, they made a decision. They would not give up, because as far as they knew, the war was still going on. So they moved into the jungle, deep, hidden, silent. They watched from the shadows. They stole food from local farms, destroyed supplies, set fires in the night, and every time they were spotted, they disappeared again into the trees. To them, this was not survival. This was duty. This was war. At first, survival felt manageable. There were still a few of them, still armed, still disciplined, still believing. Inside the dense jungle of Lubang Island, they created a routine. Move at night, hide during the day, strike when no one expects it. They stole rice from nearby farms, destroyed anything they believed could help the enemy, and when villagers tried to stop them, they didn't see civilians. They saw threats, because in their minds, this was still war. Months passed. Then something strange started happening. Papers began appearing, leaflets scattered across the jungle floor, printed messages, clear words. The war is over. Japan had surrendered. At first, they stared at the paper in silence. Then, they laughed, because to them, it was obvious this was a trick. A psychological tactic by the enemy to make them surrender. And Onoda believed that completely. There was no doubt in his mind. Why would the enemy tell the truth? So they ignored it, and they kept fighting. But time doesn't stop, even when you refuse to acknowledge it. One by one, the group began to shrink. Some surrendered. Some disappeared. Some were killed. Each loss made the jungle feel bigger, quieter, more isolating, until eventually, it was just Onoda. Alone. Completely alone. By then, survival was no longer routine. It was exhausting. He lived off whatever he could find. Bananas, coconuts, stolen food. His clothes rotted. His weapon aged with him, but he never let it go. Because that rifle was proof that he still had a mission. Sometimes he would hear voices, search parties, calling his name, telling him to come out, telling him the war had ended. But every time he heard them, he didn't feel relief. He felt danger, because in his mind, they were not rescuers. They were enemies. trying to capture him. So he stayed hidden, watching, waiting, still fighting a war that no longer existed. And with every passing year, the line between reality and belief began to disappear. Years passed. Not 1, not 5, years, turning into decades. But inside the jungle of Lubang Island, nothing felt different. To Hiroo Onoda, time had stopped. The war was still happening. And he was still a soldier. But outside that island, the world had moved on. World War II had ended. Countries rebuilt. New wars began. New generations were born. And yet, somewhere in that dense jungle, Onoda was still hiding, still watching, still waiting for orders that would never come. Search parties were sent, again and again, from Japan, from local authorities, even from families of the soldiers who had been left behind. They called his name, left food, dropped letters from the sky, photos, messages from loved ones, proof that life had continued without him. One letter in particular changed everything. It was from his own family, carefully written, personal, real. It told him the truth. The war was over. Japan had surrendered years ago. They begged him to come home. Onoda read it, more than once, slowly, carefully, and then he folded it, put it away, and chose not to believe it, because if that letter was true, then everything he had done, every attack, every shot fired, every life taken, would no longer be part of a war. It would be something else, something he could not accept. So instead, he made a decision, a quiet one, but final. He would trust his orders, not the world, not the evidence, not even his own family, because his commander had said one thing: do not surrender, under any circumstances. And so, even as helicopters flew overhead, even as voices echoed through the jungle calling his name, even as proof piled up around him, Onoda stayed hidden. The world tried to bring him back, again and again, but every attempt failed, because the war wasn't keeping him there anymore. His belief was, and by now, that belief was stronger than reality itself. By 1974, almost no one believed he was still alive. Decades had passed. Search efforts slowed, then stopped. To the world, Hiroo Onoda was just a story, a ghost of a war long gone. But deep inside the jungle of Lubang Island, he was still there, still armed, still waiting. Then one day, everything changed. Not because of the military, not because of a search party, but because of a single man, a traveler, a young adventurer who had heard rumors about a soldier still hiding on the island. Unlike everyone else, he didn't go there to force Onoda out. He went there to find him, and talk, days into the jungle. He found him, a man in worn-out clothes, holding a rifle, eyes sharp, body thin, but alert, still dangerous, still a soldier. The traveler spoke calmly, told him the truth, told him the war had ended long ago, told him Japan had changed, that everything had moved on. And for the first time, Onoda didn't immediately reject it, but he still refused to surrender, because in his mind, only one person had the authority to end his mission, his commander. And so, the traveler did something no one else had done. He went back to Japan, tracked down Onoda's former commanding officer, a man who was now living a completely normal life. The war for him was just history. But now, it wasn't over. Not yet. Weeks later, that same officer stood at the edge of the jungle, older, slower, but still recognizable. Onoda stepped out from the trees, for the first time in decades. He stood straight, saluted, just like he had been trained to do. And then he listened. "You are relieved of your duty." Just one sentence. That was all it took. In that moment, nearly 30 years of war collapsed. Onoda lowered his weapon, not because he was defeated, but because he was finally released. The date was March 9th, 1974. World War II had ended in 1945. He had spent almost 3 decades fighting a war that didn't exist. And as he walked out of the jungle, he didn't look like a soldier returning home. He looked like a man who had just lost 30 years of his life, not to the enemy, but to a belief he never questioned.